In this video, we'll be covering the 10.2 worksheet. Problem 1 states, graph the hyperbola given its equation. The equation given is in standard form. When I go over here to these equations, you can see that this is the form that we want. One of the most important things you want to do when you have it in standard form is to go ahead and make sure you know which set of equations you're going to be using. So I'm going to be looking at what my variable is for the very first term. Since our term here is y, that means we'll be using these sets of equation where the transverse axis is vertical. So I'm going to go ahead and cover up the horizontal equations. Okay. Now, our center is going to be at HK. Notice that our H is not associated with the first term here. It's actually associated with the X value. Notice that there's no shift with our X or with the Y. So that means our center is going to be at 0, 0. So H is equal to 0 and also K is equal to 0. Now let's determine our A and our B. Notice here, A is always going to be associated with the first term. So if A squared is equal to 25, that means A is equal to 5. B squared will always be associated with the second term. So B squared is equal to 16, which means B is equal to 4. We can solve for C by using this equation. C squared is equal to A squared, which is 25, plus B squared, which is 16. So C squared is going to equal to 41, which means C is equal to the square root of 41, or approximately 6.4. Let's go ahead and solve for our foci. Our foci is going to be H, which is 0, so 0 and 0, and our Y will be K plus C. Since K is 0, I'm going to be going to use the square root of 41 and negative square root of 41. So our foci is 0 square root of 41 and 0 negative square root of 41. Our vertices are going to be at H, again at 0 and 0. And notice over here it says K plus A. K is 0 and A is 5. So we're going to have 0, 5 and 0, K minus A, or 0, negative 5. For our asymptotes, we'll be using this equation here. Notice that the H is 0 and the K is 0. So these terms just cancel out. You want a plus or minus, and the A value goes on top, which is our 5, and our B is the 4 that goes in the denominator. So our asymptotes are simply y is equal to plus or minus 5/4 times x. Once we have this information, we can go ahead and graph. The center is going to be right here at the origin, and then we're going to go over 4 in the X direction. So I'm going to go forward 4 and I'm going to go back 4. Another way you can remember this is that since the 4 is underneath the X, we're going to be moving that forward 4 and back 4. The 5 is going to be underneath our Y. So in the Y direction, we're going to be going up 5 and we're going to be going down 5. That creates the box that I have shown here. Always go ahead and sketch this using a dashed line because this is not what we're actually graphing. To draw our asymptotes, we're going to be using the corners and drawing lines diagonal going through the center. So diagonal point, center, diagonal. This will be one of our asymptotes going in this direction and the other will be going in this direction. So this is going to be a plus 5/4 x and this is going to be our asymptote in negative 5/4 x. Since we know that this is a transverse axis that is vertical, we're going to be drawing a hyperbola going in a vertical direction. Okay. The foci point is going to be approximately 6.4. So I went up 6.4 and I also went down 6.4. Number 2 says graph the hyperbola centered at the origin, but now we have it in this form. Remember, when you're looking at these equations, you always want to have it in terms of a standard form, which means it has to look similar to this equation here or this equation here. Notice that both of these are equal to 1, so we want to make this side equal to 1. So I divided everything by 144. Then what I did over here was rearrange so that my positive term was written first. 16y squared divided by 144 can be reduced to y squared divided by 9. Notice here I have the negative, so our x is going to be our second value. 9 divided by 144 can be simplified to 1 over 16. All of that is equal to 1. Okay. Our center again is at 0, 0, since there's no number associated to the x and to the y. So a squared is equal to 9, which means a is equal to 3, and our b squared is equal to 16, which means that b is equal to 4. Use the formulas to solve for c, which can be found here. So a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. So here I have 9 plus 16 is equal to 25, so c squared is equal to 25 means that c is equal to 5. We can find our foci now by using these equations. Since our y is first, we're still using our transverse axis that is vertical. This is the equation for our foci, so let's go ahead and start with that one first. H is going to be 0, K is 0, plus C. Since C is 5, I have one foci at 0, 5. The other one is going to be at 0, negative 5. Our vertices is going to go next, and here I have an H at 0, and this is going to be K plus A. 0 plus 3 is 3, so I have 0 and 3, and my other one is going to be at 0, negative 3. Our asymptotes, again, our H and our K are gone, so I'm going to have a plus or a minus, A, which in this case is 3, divided by B, which is 4. So I have y is equal to plus or minus 3/4 times x. When I go and graph it, I'm going to have the center at 0, 0. Because my 4 is underneath the x, I'm going to go forward 4, and I'm going to go back 4. The y has a 3, so I'm going to go up 3, and I'm going to go down 3. This is where I can go ahead and draw my box. Your linear asymptotes are going to be from the corner of the rectangle through the center to the other corner. That's our first asymptote, which is going to be a positive 3/4 times x. This asymptote here is going to be the negative 3/4 x because it has a negative slope. I went ahead and drew our foci, which is going to be 0, 5, which is that point there, and also this point here. Again, the transverse axis is vertical, so I'm going to go ahead and draw my hyperbola, approaching the asymptotes, but never touching it. Number 3 says graph the hyperbola in this general form. So when you have an equation like this, the first thing we need to do is go ahead and combine our like terms and complete the squares. Over here I have our 9x squared minus 36x plus some number. I chose to put the x first because if you notice, the x is a positive term and the y squared has a negative term. So the negative y squared will be our second term. So negative 16y squared plus 32y plus some number is going to equal, take this coefficient over to the other side, which makes it 124, plus two numbers. Since we're adding two numbers here, we have to add two numbers on the other side of the equal sign. Let's complete the squares for our x. First thing I want to do is factor this 9 out and get something inside the parentheses. So 9 parentheses x squared minus 9 times 4 is 36, so 4 is going to be in the middle, times x. To complete the squares, I'm taking this middle term, which is negative 4, always divided by 2, and you get a negative 2. Square it, and you get a 4. This 4 goes in this blank. When I'm filling out the other side of the equation, you have to remember that 4 times 9 is what we're adding to this side of the equation. So 4 times 9 is 36, so I added 36 to this side of the equation. For the second term, we want to factor out the negative 16. So negative 16 times y squared minus 2. This is a minus because you have a negative and a negative, which makes a positive. 16 times 2 is 32y, plus some number. Remember to take the middle term, in this case negative 2, you divide it by 2, and that gets us a negative 1. Square it, and you get a positive 1. The positive 1 goes on this side, but remember that this number times negative 16 is being added to this side of the equation. So I want to add a negative 16 on this side. For our next step, I went ahead and factored. I brought the 9 directly down, and then I have factored this equation. I use this to help me. All I'm going to do is pull out the variable that's on our second line here, in this case x, and put it in front of the negative 2. So x minus 2 square minus, bring down your 16, and then again use the variable in this equation to put it right in front of that negative 1. So y minus 1 squared is equal to, use your calculator to add these numbers up together, and you should get 144. Remember that this is not in standard form, so I want to divide everything by 144. So 9 divided by 144 is the same thing as 1 over 16. 16 divided by 144 is going to be 1/9. The negative was brought straight down. And 144 divided by 144 is just 1. So now that I have it in standard form, I can go ahead and solve for my equations. Use the formulas that we have on this sheet. Notice that in this form, the x is first, so here we're going to have a transverse axis that is horizontal. We're going to go ahead and find our center, which is h and k. Notice that the negatives are there, which I also have here. So our center is just going to be the number h, which is 2, and k, which is 1. Our a squared is equal to 16, so a is equal to 4, and our b squared is equal to 9, so our b in this case is 3. To find the foci, we need to determine what our value c is. So I did that up here. C squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. So c squared is equal to 16 plus 9. So c is equal to 5. In order to do these equations, I went ahead and wrote it out, and then I simplified it on the second line. So h is going to be 2. That's our h value here, plus c. So here's my plus, and we determined c to be 5, comma k, which is 1. So 2 plus 5 is 7, comma 1. So this is our first foci. The second one is going to be a 2 minus c, which is 5. So 2 minus 5, comma 1. 2 minus 5 is negative 3, comma 1. This is our second foci. Let's go ahead and solve for our vertices. Again, use this equation that we have here, which I did over here. Our h is going to be 2 plus our a. Our a in this case is going to be 4. So 2 plus 4 is 6, comma, our k, which is 1. The second one is going to be our 2 minus 4, comma 1. So 2 minus 4 is negative 2, comma 1. Now we can graph with our information. Our center is going to be at 2, 1, so I went forward 2 and up 1, and here's my new center. I went 4 units forward and back from the center. So from here I went forward 4 and I went back 4. Our y has a b value of 3, so I went up 3 from the center and I went down 3 from the center. I use this to create my dashed box. Use the corners of your rectangle to draw your linear asymptotes in this direction and in this direction. Notice here our foci is going to be positive 7, positive 1, and negative 3, which is back, positive 1. So our foci is going to be here and here. That means we want to go ahead and draw our graph approaching the asymptotes but never touching it. Number 4 says to find the center, vertices, foci, and asymptotes of a hyperbola. Notice that this is in standard form, so we want to make sure we know which set of equations to use. Since x is our first term, we're going to be using the transverse axis that is horizontal, these set of equations. First thing we're going to do is find the center. Notice that we have the standard equations that include a negative sign. This is a positive sign, which means that x is going to be equal to negative 8. Our y already has a negative sign there, so we're just taking the 6. So our center is going to be at negative 8, 6. H is negative 8, and k will be 6. Here our a always goes first, so a squared is equal to 4, which means a is equal to 2. Our b squared is equal to 9, which means b is equal to 3. We can solve for c using this equation here. So 4 plus 9 is equal to 13, so c is equal to the square root of 13, or approximately 3.6. If we're finding the foci, we definitely want to use the exact value and not the approximation. So our foci is going to be h, which is negative 8, plus c, which is going to be the square root of 13. We cannot add these two terms together because this is a rational number and this is an irrational number. So you're going to leave it in this form. Comma, k, which is 6, and h, which is again negative 8, minus c, so minus the square root of 13, comma, k, which is 6. For the vertices, we're going to be using these sets of equations, which is h plus a. We already determined that h is negative 8 and a is going to be 2. So I have negative 8 plus 2, comma, 6. Negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6, 6. And h minus a is negative 8 minus 2, comma, 6. Negative 8 minus 2 is negative 10, comma, 6. So I found my two vertex here. For our asymptotes, what we're going to do is use this equation. Notice I kept it in the exact same form and I just plugged in our numbers. Here I have y minus k, and k is 6. So y minus 6 is equal to plus or minus b, which is 3, divided by a, which is 2. So 3 divided by 2, x minus h. Since h is negative, and here I have a negative, that becomes a plus. and then the number 8. Once you get here, completely write this out into two separate equations. Notice that I have a positive 3/2 here and a negative 3/2 here. Go ahead and distribute the 3/2 on the first equation and you should get this equation here. Then add 6 to both sides. You should get y is equal to 3/2 x plus 18. This is our first asymptote. The second asymptote, you need to distribute the negative as well as the 3/2 into the parentheses. So you should get negative 3/2 x. Negative times positive is negative. 2 goes into 8 4 times, and 4 times 3 is 12. Add 6 to both sides, and you should get y is equal to negative 3/2 x minus 6. In this particular problem, you do not need to graph the hyperbola. I normally will provide a graph for the ones who are visual so you can verify your points that you got by doing the math. Number 5 states, find the foci of the hyperbola given its equation in general term. So again, we're going to have to complete the squares. First thing I did was locate the x squared and notice that it is a positive value. So we're listing these first. So 4x squared plus 32x plus some number. Our y squared is negative, so that will be our second term. Minus y squared. So then I'm just going to go ahead and put equals and take 48 over to the other side. Since we're only completing the square for one term, we're only going to add one number to the other side as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and factor out the 4, which gives me an x squared plus 8 because 4 times 8 is 32. To complete the square, I'm going to take this 8, divide it by 2, which gets me a positive 4. When you square that value, you get a 16, and that goes in our first blank. But when we go to the other side, remember we're multiplying by 4. So 16 times 4 is going to be 64, which we need to add to the other side. To go ahead and factor this, I went ahead and dropped the 4 down, and I used the variable x and placed it right in front of the plus 4. So I get x plus 4, and I square that. Minus y squared is equal to, and then add these two terms. You should have gotten a 16. This is still not in the correct form. We want this equation equal to 1, so we're dividing everything by 16. Simplify your fractions. So 4 over 16 is the same thing as 1/4, and then I have left the x plus 4 squared in the numerator, minus 1 y squared divided by 16 is equal to 1. This is our standard form. Remember, we're looking for the foci, so that means we need to determine what our A, B, and C are. Use this equation. So the A is going to be associated with the first term. So A squared is equal to 4, which means A is equal to 2. B squared is equal to 16, which means B is equal to 4. Use the formula to calculate the C. So here I'm going to have 4 plus 16 is equal to C squared. So C is going to be equal to the square root of 20. If you can simplify this, you should, which we did here. 2 square root of 5. We have to determine what our center is before we can determine what our foci is. So notice that here we have a plus 4. That means our center is going to be a negative 4. And here there is no number attached to our y, so y is going to be equal to 0. Remember, our x is first, so we're using our transverse axis that's horizontal. The equations for the foci are here, which says h plus c, comma, k. Our h in this case is -4, so I put -4 here, plus c, and I'm using this form here. So plus 2 square root of 5. Our k in this case is going to be 0. And again, I'm going to be using this equation. Here's my h, which is -4, minus our c, which is 2 square root of 5, comma 0, since our k is 0. Since all we're looking for is our foci, this is the only information you need to provide. Number 6 says to write the equation of a hyperbola given its foci and its vertices. So I'm going to go ahead and just graph it on the paper. Here my foci is going to be at -8, 2, and 0, 2. So I went ahead and put that and labeled it with the F. Our vertices are at -7, 2, which I also listed here and indicated it with the V, and -1, 2, which is also this point. To find the center here, you can use either the pair of foci or the pair of vertices and find the average. I'm going to use the foci. -8 plus 0 is -8. Divide that by 2 and you get -4. 2 plus 2 is 4. Divide that by 2 and you get 2. So our center is going to be -4, 2. So this is my h and this is my k. The next thing I'm going to do is determine the distance from the center to our vertice. I can see that the difference between the center and the vertice is 3 units. I can use this vertice or I can use this vertice. It's still going to be a distance of 3. If you're having problems determining if this is your A or if this is your B, you need to go ahead and look at your equations. Notice that our line is going to be horizontal. That means our transverse axis is going to be horizontal, and I'm going to be using these set of equations. Here, the center and the vertice is used by this equation. So if I'm looking at this equation, I can see h, which is our center, plus a distance a gives us our vertice. So a is going to be the difference between our center and our vertice. The distance from the center to the foci is going to be our C. Notice here I have our center here and this is our foci, and the difference is going to be either a plus C or a minus C. So when I go to here, I can see that the distance from the center to the foci is going to be 4. So I can see that C is equal to 4 and A is going to be equal to 3. We can solve for B squared using this equation. All I did here was subtract A squared from both sides. So B squared is equal to C squared minus A squared. C squared is going to be 16 since C is equal to 4, and A squared is going to be 9 since A is equal to 3. So 16 minus 9 is 7, which means that our B is going to equal to the square root of 7. Now I can go ahead and write everything down in the form it wants. Still using the horizontal transverse axis, we're going to go ahead and write it in this way. Our x goes first minus our h. Remember, h in this case is -4, so a negative times a negative is going to be a positive 4. Square that and divide that by a squared. A squared is going to equal to 9, so I put a 9 in the denominator. Minus y minus k. Since k is 2, I'm going to make sure to put y minus 2. All of that needs to be squared, divided by b squared. Since b is equal to the square root of 7, we know that b squared is going to be equal to 7. So I put 7 in the denominator, and don't forget to equal this to 1. This concludes the 10.2 worksheet. Please let me know if you have any questions.